And to your specific abstract point that, when the transgression by one company could potentially have huge impact on the entire industry and sometimes the country. So a case which we don't cover in the book is a Brazilian company called Petrobras, which is the oil company of Brazil. And it was the pride of the country. And when Brazilians spoke about their economy, it was kind of, oh, we are the country where Petrobras is. We are so proud of it. It's an oil company and so on and so forth. And a few years back, it was found that the company's operations several people in the company were engaging in corrupt practices. There was a lot of kickbacks going on. And Petrobras's transgression, which was proved to be real, actually hurt the entire country's economy.
Wow.
Its GDP fell.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation.
And today our guests are Shelly and Shalini Jain. How are you doing, guys?
Good, thank you.
Great. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. So before we kick off, I'm interested. So how long have you guys been working together as a team?
On this book for about 4 years now.
Wow. And do you work together outside of the book?
Yes, we are both professors at different campuses at the University of Washington. So we have co-authored a couple of articles. We also happen to be married for 32 years.
Well, that's the best. That's the best partnership. I don't know why you didn't lead with that.
And we have been living under the same house now for 32 years. Yeah.
But working in different campuses just to keep it fresh, so you can come home and go, this is what happened to me today. And the other one won't go, I know what you're talking about.
Spot on. Absolutely.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about what you guys do then.
So I am an associate professor in management, and my research is primarily in the area of social issues in management relating to ethics, corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And Shelly?
Thank you, Judith, for having us on this podcast. I'm a professor of marketing and international business at the Foster School of Business, which is the School of Business at University of Washington, Seattle campus. And I've been here now for 16 years. And my research looks at, a number of marketing related issues. Mostly I look at marketing phenomena through the lens of understanding how do consumers process marketing information and make judgments thereof. So I look at consumer psychology, and the specific domains within consumer psychology I look at include advertising, brand strategy, the psychology of COVID, the consumer psychology of addictions, and several other topics. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
That sounds actually quite fascinating. Never thought about consumer psychology as a separate thing. So I'm quite curious about that. And I understand that your book is around dealing with the transgressions. And I'm like, that's such an interesting word to have chosen. Shelly, can you tell us what's behind that? So give us the name of the book and then tell us a bit about why you've gone with transgressions other than something else.
So the title of the book is Managing Brand Transgressions with the customary : 8 Principles to Transform Your Brand. Mm-hmm. And the word transgressions actually comes from the scholarly literature, which uses this verbiage. When brands are perceived to have violated some expectations, then the literature calls the phenomenon brand transgressions. So we got it from there. And in hindsight, we felt it was a good choice because sometimes brand transgressions are held synonymous with the notion of brand crises. And we do acknowledge that brand transgressions could lead to brand crises. However, brand crises are not all relating to brand transgressions the way we capture them in the book. A brand could be in crisis because its profit is falling, its market share is declining, competition has come in, or something of that sort, which is not really transgressive in nature. It's just, part of doing business. But transgressions are when brands are perceived to have committed some mistake, which is consequential to one or more of its the stakeholders.
Okay, I get that. Terms transgressions almost makes it sound as though they're relatively minor, but that doesn't sound like what you're saying. And Shalini, I can see you're shaking your head there. Tell me more.
So no, it's not minor. It can be. And sometimes it's deliberate. Sometimes it's association or a perception. But irrespective, there is a consequence, particularly in this age of digital democracy and how information travels at lightning speed in a matter of seconds. So a transgression, it could be a quality issue. It could be a violation of a social norm. It could be, something like, but they're, at least based on our book and the research, they are not small.
Okay. Can you give me an example then of a brand that's had a transgression and perhaps how they could have responded to that or how they did respond to that?
So,
absolutely. Shelly, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So, Judith, just to add a wrinkle to what Shalini said, yes, some transgressions could be minor, some could be major. So think of the severity of a transgression on a continuum from minor to severe. However, it could be foolhardy for brands and corporations to consider a perceived transgression as minor, which adds to what Shalini just shared. Their consequences could be pretty devastating. Just to illustrate that with an example, which feeds into your specific question, United Airlines, some years back, was held responsible for losing or destroying the guitar of a customer that was checked in. And the customer, I believe, politely asked United, "Can you please get my guitar back or give me some restitution?" And the story goes that his concerns were not attended to. So you would think that this is not a very severe transgression. A guitar probably costs a few $100s or maybe a few $1,000s at most, if it is a really high-end guitar. But this customer created a song on another guitar of his, which he posted on YouTube. And YouTube, this video went viral. And ostensibly, United Airlines lost close to several $100 million in its market, in its stock price, in its overall market cap. So this seemingly minor violation became a pretty big violation. On the other hand, there are some violations, like we covered in the book. As an example, Boeing 737 MAX crashes back to back in 2018 and 2019, which led to the death of 346 passengers. And the plot is still unraveling. It's not over. And Boeing, I believe, is already poorer by $30 billion in fines, legal fees, and so on, and $60 billion in canceled orders. So this is just the financial aftermath, not to talk about the 346 lives that were lost, the turnover of CEOs, the increased scrutiny that the company is undergoing, and all kinds of things that are emerging because of this scrutiny, which are putting the brand really, really in a difficult spot. So these are some, minor to major transgressions and some of the consequences that transgressing brands could potentially be subject to. Now, I will, if it's okay, I will let Shalini talk about, the roadmap we talk about in terms of how to address these transgressions when a brand is perceived to be associated with it. Is that okay, Shalini?
Yes, absolutely. So our first principle, and kind of foundational to our book, talks about what should a brand do if they have been perceived to have transgressed.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing we are recommending, based on our research, is to do the right thing. Now, that seems almost simplistic, obvious, but it's quite surprising how that's actually not the route that is generally taken by most corporations that have been found to have been transgressed. And it's likely because of legal concerns, potential lawsuits, shareholder value, what it will do to the brand and things like that, which all seem reasonable at first glance. But our research has found that while it may help the brand in the short term, in the long term, this nightmare kind of catches up on them, and the consequences are not pretty. So we use the case of Tylenol as an example of gold standard of what does doing the right thing mean. So, and this is a kind of a dated case from 1982, when the news broke in Chicago that 7 people had died after having consumed Tylenol. And of course, this was shocking. And, the company at that time was ruling the market in this particular area of analgesics. And they had to do something really quickly. So the then CEO, James Burke, made the call, and his call was as follows. First, how can we protect the customer? And second, how can we protect the brand? Very unusual. And he not only took that call, but he acted on it. So what did the action involve? He went on national media and, acknowledged that this has happened, that they don't know why, recommended that people not consume Tylenol till they have gotten to the bottom of it, that they are cooperating with the regulators. They launched a 1-800 hotline 24/7 where actual human beings were responding to consumer concerns. They had a media reporting system twice or thrice a day where they would provide updates on progress. This was all very unusual in the 1980s for any corporation to do.
Still is, actually, isn't it? So okay, I get that. So the first principle being doing the right thing, and it sounded like they did the right thing because they thought of the customer first. And I know your second principle was to take accountability. So presumably they took accountability in that instance as well, because they went to the press to actually say what's going on.
Yes. Sorry, go, Shalini.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you for Judith for that question. So they did take accountability. We just want to differentiate between taking accountability and assuming responsibility. Tylenol probably could not have taken responsibility unless they got to the bottom of it and discovered that there was some problem with their own operations that contributed to this situation. However, they said very clearly, our brand has done damage and we will take care of it. We will address the pain and the hurt of the victims. We are on top of this. So I think that is what is taking accountability rather than saying we are at fault. And not surprisingly, Tylenol did a micro-level audit of their supply chain, their production, their packaging, their product, and so on and so forth. And they found that there was no fault at any stage of Tylenol as far as Johnson & Johnson, the parent company, was concerned. So yes, taking accountability is reassuring the victims that we will get on top of this. We really want to resolve this situation and address the pain and the hurt that you're experiencing.
Okay. And I feel like, thank you for that. I feel like the third and fourth principles, act with lightning speed and communicate transparently, they kind of go hand in hand, don't they?
Yes, they do. Absolutely. And Tylenol actually went a step ahead. So there was another incident a couple of months later in California. And the CEO took the position this time of withdrawing their product nationwide from all retail stores, stop advertising the product, and, again, out of concern and walking the talk about wanting to keep the customer safe, because they still hadn't identified what was going on.
Yeah.
And so again, very unusual, right? To just pull off your product from shelves, to stop advertising it.
That's because even though they hadn't read your book yet, they knew that the next principle was about choosing principle over profit.
That's right. That's right. And sometimes, Judith, in our research, what we find is that companies take time to respond. And there could be various reasons for it. We don't delve into why companies take time to respond. But in today's day and age, where the digital environment that we live in, we know from real life case studies that sometimes simple but damaging messages have actually created revolutions in countries. And so brands need to be sensitive to this environment, this information democracy, digital democracy that Shalini spoke about. Yet they take a long time to acknowledge that there seems to be a problem. And the case in point is that of Boeing 737 MAX 2 crashes, and their ex-CEO, Dennis Muhlenberg, who in our opinion responded really, really suboptimally to this situation. He took 26 days to acknowledge that they had a problem as a company after the second crash, which took place 6 months after the first crash. So this shows that even in today's day and age, corporations do not have a playbook by which they respond, or they are getting counsel, which in our understanding is misplaced or misdirected.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting you saying that, and especially looking at your next principle being treat each life with dignity. When we hear, and of course, I suppose all the facts aren't quite in yet because it's quite new, but of a very large global consultancy firm, and it being alleged that one of its very new youngish workers committed suicide 4 months in due to the workload. And it appears a few days later that we still don't really have a response from that company. And I suppose that in itself is a transgression, because it allows space for alternative narratives to be proposed, because there's nothing coming back. So you're just hearing the one side of the story. And even though you could almost argue it's another part of the world, for a global firm, it could be in any country. So what do you think the response, do you know the case that I'm talking about? What?
Yes.
So if you were to advise them, if they came along and you came along and said, right, we know what you should be doing, how would they deal with that, particularly that principle about treating each life with dignity, principle 6? How would you propose they demonstrate they're doing that?
Shalini, you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. I think it's again a gold standard example of not something so extreme where somebody died.
Yeah.
But the case of Starbucks, where 2 customers were racially profiled and wrongly arrested for not ordering coffee.
Yeah.
And so what did the CEO of Starbucks do? So the first thing he did is go on national television and apologize. And then he flew all the way across from Seattle to Philadelphia to apologize to these 2 victims, customers of Starbucks in person. That's again, so we found these are very unusual kind of steps that some CEOs have taken, which we think are,
Did
great.
Did they close all the stores on the same, which I thought was amazing, because the cost of shutting every single store in a marketplace where there are so many competitors made quite the statement.
8,000 stores to be precise, and they shut them down within 2 weeks of the incident. And this was to provide racial profiling training to all of their employees. And the CEO went again on national television saying it's not the fault of the barista. We set her up for failure. I am responsible. The buck stops with me. These are actual statements that the CEO made. So in the case of, an employee dying by suicide, one would expect the normal examples of deflecting or blaming, saying, oh, it was this individual's mental health or some, a lifestyle. That would be, I would expect a normal standard response. But for any company, again, they don't know why it happened. It could well be this person's mental health. But to express regret that it happened, that they will do everything in their capacity to ensure that employees are not driven to that because of workload, to express empathy for the victims' families. These would be examples, right?
Yeah.
Of treating each life with dignity. Like there's also a recent case of a Wells Fargo employee who died in her cubicle and was there for 4 days.
I know. I mean, 4 days. I mean, it just beggars belief, and it's kind of the way you think about this whole rhetoric about you need to be back in the office because it's all about building culture and collaboration, and yet someone could be dead for 4 days and no one know. That speaks volumes for the culture. You don't need to. Gosh, I don't even have words when I think about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Judith, this is I heard about this case, and I'm not naming the corporation and so on. But as Shalini said, some kind of contrition is really, really important for the company to express. And the fact that they have already taken a few days might indicate many things. And there could be multiple hypotheses why the employee committed suicide. As Shalini said, mental health issues. There could be something else going on in the life of of this employee. But that is really missing the point from that company's viewpoint. There are attributions, and you said something which is, we repeat in the book again and again, which is more strategic in nature rather than empathic. But we say, if you don't do something at lightning speed and are transparent, you will lose the narrative as a brand. And in today's day and age, there could be multiple narratives that could be created, and then you will try to fix it, and it'll be probably too late. There'll be too much damage that might have already taken place.
Let's listen to a quick advert. As a leader, you know that having a strong level of influence is essential to achieving your goals. But how do you know if you're truly making an impact? Take the How Influential Are You scorecard to get a clear picture of your current level of influence and identify areas for improvement. With personalised recommendations and valuable strategies, you'll be able to amplify your influence and make a real difference as a leader. Don't miss this opportunity to improve your leadership skills. Take the scorecard now at amplifyyourinfluence.scoreapp.com. Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious.
I'll just give you another example, which is not as serious a transgression, but a transgression nevertheless, in terms of speed of response, in addition to the wonderful example that Shalini shared of Starbucks. In April, Apple released an ad for iPad. We do not cover that case in our book because our book was already, being printed. And the ad showed an industrial machinery crushing creative objects like guitars, statues, sculptures and paint boxes and musical instruments, everything to do with creative industry, as we know stereotypically. And at the end of the crush by the industrial machinery emerged this gleaming, beautiful looking iPad. And I think the tagline was the thinnest iPad ever, or something to that effect. Now, some people might argue, oh, it's a cool ad, and they're talking about iPad and so on and so forth. But guess what? Their core target segment, which was the creative industry, had a nosebleed when they saw this ad. Because they said, you are threatening our livelihood by saying AI is going to take over. So now that is the transgression, but it was the response which I think is really notable. Apple apologized the next day, and they said, we were miscalibrated. We are responsible for this ad. We are withdrawing it, and we will not release it on television any longer. So I think the speed with which they responded, their acknowledgement, they're taking responsibility, and their contrition and so on at warp speed, transparently, was remarkable. And I think this company where this employee committed suicide, I think they're losing a few tricks here. They really need to, in our opinion, and based on our learning, they need to act fast, and they need to do something to really express heartfelt empathy for the loss of this human being.
Yeah, and I think actually as well is that it's an industry-wide transgression, or at least interesting industry-wide notable thing, because there was already a narrative of these firms having people work long hours, and it didn't take too long for other people to say, oh, but in this similar firm this happened, and in this, so it kind of affects the industry as well, because, and it's more likely for people to believe one type of narrative because it sits within a perceived culture of overwork, undervalued, that's really sitting there, and not just in one country. And it made me think about the Starbucks incident, because whilst it happened in America, in the UK, people are saying, I'm never going to go into a Starbucks. And even, and it just made you kind of question the entire brand, regardless of where it was. But their fast response made go, oh, all right then, it's okay. All right then, well, I don't know if we really believe this training is going to make a difference, but you said something, so we're willing to wait and see what's going to happen.
Yep, absolutely. And we think the company will be well advised, based on our book, to use Starbucks playbook and do some transformation. We are not at all blaming the company. Please make sure that
No, I understand what you're saying. These are just examples.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure we'll find almost any company making an example anywhere in the world. So I totally get what you're saying. I'm wondering actually whether there's a place for governments to step in and say certain things. Because I'm just thinking, because sometimes when a brand makes a transgression, it reflects on the nation, maybe unfairly, but there's so there's an industry thing and also a nation thing. So, for example, if we use the Starbucks, like certainly from surely not just the UK, where we're like, well, we regularly go into coffee shops and we may or may not order anything, and we could be there, or we'll go there for the whole day to work and maybe have 2 coffees, but nobody wants to tell us to go. What does that? Why is it different in America? Why is it? Yeah, and so I'm not saying that's an example for the government to step in, but there are times when things happen and it puts the spotlight on the industry or the nation, and I wonder whether at that times does the industry body or the government or the state needs to step in and say not everybody or something. I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud, and probably not very well. It's late here.
Yeah. Well, corporations in general don't like interference from government, and actually most likely feel that there is already too much regulation. So again,
but it depends on the country you're in, actually.
Yeah.
Because some countries probably think there needs to be more government interventions, and others will think there's less.
So let's take the example of Volkswagen. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So of course, the discovery was made in America that they deliberately installed cheap devices to beat emission standards.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Right? And I think the German, made in Germany brand was affected
Yeah.
because it is also partially owned by the government, and the government is a stakeholder. So actually, government would be seen as a party to this transgression.
Right.
And of course, excuse me, Volkswagen's response, which was kind of a staggered confession. Each time they got caught, they'd say, "Oh yeah, by the way, we did this in cars in UK as well, and oh yes, it's also in Europe, and it's also in China, and it's also gasoline. It's not just diesel, and oh by the way, these other brands as well." So this didn't help, of course, the corporation, but I think it did. At least from the research we saw, impacted the primacy of made in Germany.
Yeah,
Mm.
because that in itself was a very strong brand, isn't it? A brand you can rely on when you
Yeah.
saw that.
And then the media also perceived it is like, for example, at least the research we did, it is perceived that the media is less. What's the in the German media was kind of helping in the cover up in one sense, a little. They were not that transparent, or they were not doing sufficient investigation till enough evidence came out that they couldn't not report it. So, the media was also, some people frowned on the role of the German media in bringing this out. And
It's a bit like, thank you for that. I'm just sort of thinking that some of these finance, because we had a run of financial services companies all doing a little bit naughty stuff, and there was a bit of a run on that, wasn't it? And I think there was at the time more of a statement that's saying, okay, these couple over here are, they're rebels. They're not, they're not typical, because there was that concern of the global hit on the entire industry due to some transgressions made by a couple of companies, and it was just, I suppose, unfortunate that it was one, then the next, that happened.
So, the government as stakeholder is what Shalini mentioned to you.
Yeah.
And we cover the case of Nestle Maggi, which is an instant noodle brand in India.
Right.
And we talk about the government's involvement in that case. And the transgression turned out to be not a consumer-directed transgression, though it was perceived to be so. The real transgression, which Nestle was, we think, really struggling to manage, was its getting into the hair of the government. So they challenged the regulators in India, who said that we have done testing and your noodles have extra MSG. And Nestle said, no, we are certain we don't. And they did their own testing and took the government head on, which we believe was a poor decision because it delayed the recovery and transformation of the brand. So that's one aspect, of government as a stakeholder. And when you transgress against the government in some countries, and then you take the case of Boeing. Yes, the government stepped in. They asked Boeing to stop production of 737 MAX after the second crash. Donald Trump was the president when he said we need to stop production. So the government does need to step in. And to your specific abstract point that, when the transgression by one company could potentially have huge impact on the entire industry and sometimes the country. So a case which we don't cover in the book is a Brazilian company called Petrobras, which is the oil company of Brazil. And it was the pride of the country. And when Brazilians spoke about their economy, it was kind of, oh, we are the country where Petrobras is. We are so proud of it. It's an oil company and so on and so forth. And a few years back, it was found that the company's operations several people in the company were engaging in corrupt practices. There was a lot of kickbacks going on. And Petrobras's transgression, which was proved to be real, actually hurt the entire country's economy Its
Wow.
GDP fell. And besides the fact that the pride of Brazilians was hurt severely, and the company came under scrutiny and so on and so forth. So, yeah, those things are possible at times where, these kinds of companies are flag bearers. In Maggie's case, Nestle Maggie's case, it took 5 years for Maggie to get its dominance back. But during those 5 years, the entire category of instant noodles shrank,
Wow.
even though it was only Maggie. But Maggie was the dominant brand. It had 80% share. So when Maggie shrank, the industry, by definition, had to shrink. Yeah, sometimes those effects are observed.
Okay. And with my focus on leadership, I particularly like Principle 7. Leadership sets the tone. Now, I'm really interested in that because sometimes it's the leadership that has set the tone, which has led to the transgression. So what can be done about that?
So actually, that's the message, and that's exactly what we found, that whether the response was appropriate or misdirected, or it was a gold standard, it all began with the leadership. And so to claim that a transgression is because of the fault of a handful of disgruntled employees, as Wells Fargo did in its banking scandal, or even Volkswagen blamed it on some engineers, doesn't hold water.
It's a bit like these, like Enron and the like, and then saying, we don't know how that happened, but we did bonus people to have this ridiculous, we did actually did everything we possibly could to create the behaviors that has led to this transgression.
Yeah, and allowed it, and the culture rewarded risk-taking behavior, or and in our book we also talk about Fox News, and all of its its CEO, starting from the CEO and all of its lead hosts who engaged in sexual misconduct for decades and hid behind settlements and non-disclosure agreements. So leadership absolutely sets the tone, both in negative and positive ways.
You know what? Maybe part of the problem is that leadership became a noun and stopped becoming a verb. And I wonder when we began to start giving a collective noun to a group of people without requiring them to actually do action. So we said, you're all, we're not going to call you managers, you're all leaders. And that's it. That's your collective noun now. And forgetting that it's a verb, it's a doing word, as they would say back at school. You have to do something to lead. You can't just be a leader without actively doing something.
And I think the root of that problem is linking leadership evaluation to financial metrics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So leaders, because they seek short-term financial performance outcomes, engage in risk-taking behavior. And if their performance also had non-financial metrics, whether it is employees or consumers or environment, I think they would be taking decisions that would be more considerate of the various stakeholders and less risky on many dimensions.
Yeah, I think it's curious. It reminds me back in the day when I was working corporately, and I was head of HR, and I was just making sure that everyone's objectives were the right objectives, blah blah blah. And I went to my boss, who was the business director, got his objectives from his boss, and I went to the the group HR director to get their objectives. And interesting, he just went, yeah, sure, here they are. And she said, you can't have them. And I was like, right, I'm setting it for my division, so I need to know what you are being objectified on it so that you can actually meet your objectives, because I'll make sure the people in my area is going to get that done. And it was curious is that there's that kind of, when it comes to the people side, even from people who should know better, it's kind of it's too easy to ignore. And I chose to include the metrics I thought was necessary, which may or may not have been what she was going to get a pay rise on, because she wouldn't share it with me. But it was that kind of, no, let's just make them do the business stuff, and the people bit isn't important. But you can't, but if without the people part, make sure the culture is right and all this sort of stuff, you get the very transgressions that you're talking about.
Yeah, metrics are very critical, and they help. And there's a classic saying that if you can't measure it, you don't know what to do. So I think metrics are critical. I think also there can be training for leaders based on some of the stuff that we talk about. At the end of the day, the change in heart, the human revolution, as we call it, that is necessary for leaders to shift from being profit maximizers only obsessively, which could be a banana peel, to maximizing social value, if you will, where every life matters, all consumers' pain and hurt needs to be recognized, all stakeholders, and so on. We are not saying it's an easy walk, but if companies need to start working on in the long term to minimize these transgressions and or have a playbook of how to respond to these transgressions in a manner where everybody wins, where the victims win, where the presumed perpetrators win, where the regulators win, everybody wins. I think that is what will ultimately make a difference. And metrics will play a role, certainly, but we think an inner revolution is also needed, where the leader undergoes a change of heart and says, this is what I really need to do because this is the right thing to do.
Yes, I think it's self-evident that we need to, corporately, we think of businesses as their own entities, as an entity outside of the people that own it or have shares in it. Yet we don't expect it to act like a living entity. And that's what the problem is, isn't it? You have it's not just about shares. It's not just about what the shareholder value is. If there's no value being given to the other stakeholders in the business. We spend too much time about shareholders without thinking of stakeholders. And
the example of Tylenol, which was in 1982, 42 years back, and a more recent example of a brand called Patagonia, where its founder, Mr. Shunard, started out with creating a company which will not hurt the planet. And even in his will, he has recently said, I want to leave all the money to a sustainability initiative.
I remember.
So, and paraphrasing him, he said, every time I took an action to save the planet, I made more money. And then the Tylenol example shows us that when you really go through painful self-reflection and focus on addressing the victim's hurt and pain and make the whole recovery and transformation literally, predicated on how well we took care of the victim's pain and hurt, you come out victor. So Tylenol's share before the transgression was 37%. It fell to 8% after the transgression came to light. And 90 days after James Burke had pulled all those actions in place that Shalini talked about, their share went up to 48%. So there are lots of moving parts to a transgression, how you respond to it. But you really, we think you will come out a victor if you were to follow these principles. Yes, there will be legal counsel, which will probably push you back. There will be need for courage. There will be need for heart. But that's really the challenge.
I like that, the need for heart. Shalini, the final principle about building brand authenticity, I'm curious of what your take will be on that. because so many people talk about authenticity, but they do it in a way which seems to feel like curate a certain way that you want to look, and we'll call that authentic, which is I'm suspecting is not quite what you mean.
No, that's not what we mean. And it is a buzzword of sorts. It's used quite loosely in the business world. So, based on our research, we think an authentic brand is a brand that does what it says and acts obsessively on its values, stated values, and has something to show for it. So, Shelly talked about Patagonia, and so it is again, these are unusual examples. So Thanksgiving is the period where it is retailers wait for Thanksgiving, because that is when their sales tide them over the whole year round, right? And at Thanksgiving, Patagonia launched an ad a couple of years ago, which had one of its fleece jackets saying, "Don't buy this jacket." It was not an ad to buy their jacket, but actually to educate customers, to make them think twice about whether they really need that jacket, or whether it was an impulse purchase. And the outcome was their sales increased.
Of course.
Right? And so they switched to organic cotton, and it increased production significantly. They still generated money. It was also one of the first few companies that encouraged their customers to recycle, reuse. They repair, old clothing so that they can extend the life. They're still making money.
I guess that trust is being built, right, between them and the consumers. So that's probably why. And also, I think the tide is turning and will continue to turn with Generation Z as they get older into more sustainable, more heart type things. Because they just don't want to live in a world where it's so self-centered.
Actually, it's the Gen Z and the millennials who are demanding that even more than, the baby boomers or the older generations. The Gen Z and millennials customers, who are going to be the largest section of consumers in the coming years, are explicitly demanding that companies make social contributions and have values that align with theirs. So even for that reason, companies need to take note and think about their customers and what is expected of them.
Yeah. I suspect they won't do that until wholesale, and it won't be too many years now when the proportion of Gen Zs and late millennials increase to more than 50%. And I think then they'll be forced from within. But we're not that many years away from that now. So maybe. So it should happen in my lifetime, should happen in our lifetimes.
Yes.
Guys, it's been so good having you on the show. You have to come back actually and talk more. I'd like that.
We would love to.
Thank you for your kind words. It was a real pleasure to talk to you, Judith. Thank you for inviting us.
You're welcome. And thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I'm Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox Magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.